Good morning. My name is Laura Atkinson and I have the privilege of sharing a devotion with you this morning on Wednesday, the 18th of November 2020. The passage that I want to speak about that has been on my mind is a passage, interestingly, that Colin Bishop a couple of weeks ago spoke about, and it's Matthew 14 verses 22 to 33. I want to read it. Immediately he made the disciples, he is Jesus, get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against it. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Now the verse that I want to speak to this morning is verse 30, and it is a verse that many times people have said different things, but it's something that the Lord showed me that makes a lot of sense, and particularly in our day and age, I want to share it. And that is the fact that the thing that made Peter afraid and made him begin to sink while he was walking on the water was wind. Now, I've learned that every word in the Bible is chosen by God. And so when I read that verse, Peter saw the wind, it struck me because I thought, if it simply means waves because there was a strong wind and it was making strong waves, that would make a lot more sense to me why Peter was afraid, because the waves could knock him over and he'd be at risk of drowning. But the Bible specifically says that Peter saw the wind, and that is the word that God chose. And so that got me thinking about it. The context of this is that Peter, seeing Jesus, initially is afraid, and then Jesus says, "It's me, take heart, it's me, don't be afraid." And Peter has so much belief in Jesus that he gets out of the boat and he goes to walk on water, an amazing thing. And so he's following Jesus and he's looking straight at Jesus. But the moment he takes his eyes off Jesus, he begins to be afraid and he begins to sink. Now again, that's something that makes a lot of sense to me because I know that we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. And so it's easy to say, keep your eyes on Jesus and you will be okay. But there's something in our lives and in this world around us that causes us to take our eyes off Jesus. And that something, according to the Bible, is called wind. But let's think about it. You can't see wind. Whatever Peter saw was so real to him, it was so much more real than Jesus, that he began to be afraid and he began to sink. Again, when I think of that word wind, it's a contrast between Jesus, who is in front of you. He's real, he's substantial, he's personal, he's somebody who can be grasped. When Peter was sinking, he cried, "Lord, save me." Jesus reached out his hand and pulled him up. And that was all right. Jesus is real. But the thing that made Peter take his eyes off Jesus is called wind. And the contrast between Jesus and this wind is amazing. Wind is something, Ecclesiastes talks about a life that is lived without God in the world, without an acknowledgement of God, without the recognition of God, as being futile. It's a chasing after the wind. The picture is that the wind is here and there and you can chase it, but you can't grasp it. Why not? Because it's insubstantial. And so Peter saw something that is insubstantial. Other words from the dictionary that are synonyms for insubstantial are words like immaterial, flimsy, trifling, trivial, insignificant. So there's Peter, and he takes his eyes off Jesus, who the Bible is contrasting to the wind, and Jesus is real and substantial. He's solid. And then he puts his eyes on wind, which is insubstantial. Yet this wind causes Peter to be afraid, and so he begins to sink. And so that got me thinking about the kinds of things that we put our eyes on. What are the kinds of things that we look at? What are the kinds of things that make us as Christians lose sight of Jesus? And we look at these things, we lose perspective, and we look at these things and they become so frightening to us that they cause us to sink. Whether that's to sink into depression, or sink into discouragement, or sink into fear, or just to be unable to keep going. We feel like we're sinking. We feel like we are overwhelmed. And when I think of that, I think of quite a few things that that would entail. Recently, it's been the whole COVID phenomenon. So here we are in 2020 and the world seems to be quite crazy. We've had COVID, everything that has been normal to us has been changed, and it's very hard to get used to. There is a plethora of information about COVID. It's hard to make decisions, and we're facing statistics about people dying and people living and people getting sick and recovering and all sorts of things, and we needing to make wise decisions about this. That can cause us to sink because it's been quite a strange year. But there's other things. Along with COVID has come a lot of financial trouble for people, and that can be something that when we look at it, we don't know how we're going to survive. And we can begin to sink because, you know, finances are scarce and we keep getting told the economy is going to go down. And in the world, the economy is just going down and down. That is scary in itself. Then there's politics. America's going through a horrendous election. All of the allegations of fraud and corruption and the backwards and forwardsing, the fighting, and on social media it's been terrible. And you don't know what to believe. And those kinds of things, politics can cause you to become afraid. Politics can make you feel like you have no hope. The political situation, the corruption that we see, the lack of management by local municipalities can make you feel very down. Maybe it's a personal health thing. Maybe it can be cancer, or a loved one has had something happen to them, particularly during these times when you can't visit them in hospital. And those are the kinds of things that cause us to take our eyes off Jesus. They become so real to us that they become more real than Jesus and his word. And those are the kinds of things that make us sink. And the truth is that God calls them wind. And the Bible's very clear that God controls the wind. It says very clearly in a number of passages that the wind blows here and there, and God brings it out of its storehouses. He's in control of the wind. Even here in this passage, there's another passage where Jesus is walking on the water, and as soon as he gets in the boat, the wind dies down. So we know that God is in control of the wind, and the message to us is that we need to remember when we are afraid, when we are sinking, we need to remember that the things that are causing us to sink are wind. God is in control of those winds. He is in control of our life. He is in control of our death. He is in control of our health. He's in control of every moment of our lives. He is the one who provides for us from the moment we are born until the moment we die. He is the one who raises up kings and deposes kings. Romans 13 tells us that. Jesus reminds us in Matthew 6 that who of you by worrying can add one single hour to his life? We're told consistently that our lives are as a vapor, a wind, and yet the word of the Lord lasts forever. And so I want to encourage you this morning to remind yourselves when you are sinking and when you're feeling down. Remind yourself that the things that seem so real to us, in God's eyes, they are wind. We need a right perspective on them. The one to keep looking at, the one to keep believing, the one to keep focusing on, the one to keep having the right perspective about is our Lord Jesus. He is the eternal one. I want to finish with one verse that to me sums up what I'm saying, and that is this in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 24 and 25. All flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers and the flower falls, but the word of the Lord remains forever. And this word is the good news that was preached to you. Be blessed this morning as you remember these things are wind. Remind yourself of them, and remember that Jesus is the one who remains forever.